Okay, but this is the most up to date.
In terms of printed versions,
No, like they really like they just they want to pay no money for it.
Ladies and gents, 10 o'clock. Time for me to open day 4 of this inquiry. What a joy to be opening to A, cool aircon, and B, light.
Yes, we went up step ladders yesterday. That seemed to on site.
Very good. While they were hard at work, myself, Mr. Webster, and Mr. Wadsworth were also hard at work. Very successful site visit from our point of view. We managed to cover the entire walk from Rosethorpe around past the marina. The route partially up towards Gayton, and then within Gayton itself we were able to clearly visit the viewpoints that have been talked about throughout the inquiry, including that at 14, 28 and 29. 20 and 21, we walked down Milton Road. Helpfully, I was also able to enter the gardens of 3 Chimneys. I hope I didn't wake the occupant up. Fairly crunchy gravel on the way in, but we did our best to tiptoe in. Timing was exquisite because we walked back past the school pickup time, which was very neat, entirely by chance. Before visiting viewpoint 14 for that medium range view that we talked about during the inquiry. I was able then to drive the last few bits that I haven't driven previously, including the one that captured the viewpoints at 27 and 26. It was comprehensive. We didn't finish till about 4:30, but very helpful, and although they're not here, my thanks to the 2 landscape witnesses who I think were relieved to then be off and home yesterday. In fact, one said, I hope you've enjoyed your time in Northampton. I said, I'm still here tomorrow. I'll let you know. Okay. I think everyone's been here before, but just a reminder on mobile phones to be switched to silent, if I may. Fire alarm procedures not expected, but apparently there's been a practice when I haven't been here, so everyone's very adept at the fire alarm proceedings. Can I ask whether anything has raised its head over the last day that I need to be aware of before we just look at how we're set up for the rest of today's proceedings?
So just following on from yesterday, at the close of the discussion yesterday, we discussed how to best get you some evidence about agricultural land. The note. My friend and I have produced and agreed a note So if you're happy to receive that, I can
Thank you very
hand you a
much.
hard copy of that now.
I think it'll be ID 12.
It will be ID 12.
Put one on the table, because that's after the inquiry directory table, isn't it?
I've got one.
You've got one.
That's excellent. Many thanks for that. Is it explanatory, Miss Hall, or did you want to just talk to it? Are you happy that it's explanatory?
I'm hoping that my drafting is sufficiently
No,
clear, but if
that's-
it's not, I'm very happy to talk you through it.
No, that's absolutely fine. I just didn't want to drive forward and you feel that you've missed the opportunity to catch up with it. That's fine. Thank you very much for that. I'll pick up on those issues, and Councillor Cooper, you'll know that those in part came out from my questioning yesterday of Mr. Pleasant, so there's a copy there if you want to catch up. With those, anything else?
Not from my part, I don't think.
Okay. We're in a very positive position entering a Friday of being fairly confident that conditions, half an hour, closings, we'll see how we go. But,
Well,
finish
yeah,
before-
I mean,
before
we're both
lunchtime.
on 12 pages.
Perfect. Oh, sorry. Very good. So half an hour and half an hour. Nice. Hopefully finishing for before lunch. Very pleasant indeed. Just a short note on conditions from me. Thank you very much for the updated drafts. Helpful. I got a number of scribbles. The reason we discuss conditions at an inquiry is a standard part of the process, so that my report, when it goes to the Secretary of State, will make a recommendation, but it will also provide the opportunity for the Secretary of State to make an alternate decision. If, for example, that recommendation was to dismiss, it would still include details of conditions where the Secretary of State minded to approve. So discussions on conditions are a standard part of the inquiry process and imply no decision taking happening on my behalf or indeed on behalf of the council who are engaged in that conditions process. But it is necessary to know what can be set out in terms of appropriate conditions for the scheme were it to be allowed by the Secretary of State. We tend to deal with these on a round table basis. Mr. Richards, are you picking it up, or have we got a
No, I think I'm going to be picking it up.
Well volunteered.
And I have to say that, and confess, that I only gave them my serious attention last night. And I too have a number of drafting comments, but principally a matter to which I have alerted my learned friend this morning, and that's to say a condition on how to deliver the expected biodiversity net gain. Conditions akin to 20 and 21 in the Shropshire decision, I thought were absent from the draft thus far.
Well, it's funny you should mention.
Yeah, but
okay. Well, I've got a couple along similar lines, but we'll deal with this very much in a round table, so an opportunity for me to put out questions for you to just give me your thoughts and views. Councillor Cooper, if you or anyone else from the back have got questions over the conditions, have you got access to a list of them as we talk through it? Because it does make life an awful lot easier if you know what we're talking about. You do. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Yes, undoubtedly there's a couple of drafting things, but there's a couple of conditions that I think might need to be in there. And I have to say I'm going to challenge the council, well volunteered Mr. Richards, about the necessity of a couple as we go through.
So before we dive in,
Of course.
can we just allocate the admin to somebody? Somebody should have carriage of a Word version of this, so that we have a corrected version to send your case officer at the close of this
Interesting.
session.
I mean, that's a very generous offer. Normally inspectors just take that.
Oh, I wasn't
Take
offering.
that.
Yeah,
Take that
but
one on the chin.
I've only got a hard copy.
Yeah.
I'm sort of volunteering Mr. Pleasant, actually.
I can also look to my right, which is very well for me. Yes, between Maeve and I.
Okay, if we have what we will end up with is some agreed changes, I think, in this discussion, because there's some very obvious, like the duplication in condition 3, that just need to be struck through. There may be some agreed, yes, that condition will work, and there may even be Mr. Richard say, why don't we use the one from, which I think I agonised over for quite a while in the Shropshire case, to try and make biodiversity net gain work. But if there's still disagreement, then you leave it with me, and I will basically use my casting vote to decide whether it is a necessary and reasonable condition to go forward. So yes, if there's simple changes and we can get an updated version, Miss Hall, that's great. But don't worry too much about it. Normally I just take it on the chin, sit down, try to read my notes as I've gone through and create a list. I have a terrible habit of reordering conditions because I'm a stickler for the PPG approach, but actually these have been ordered in a pretty sensible way. I shouldn't sound so surprised.
Should thank Mr. Burton on that point in his absence. He helpfully rearranged and reordered some of the conditions.
Yeah. Having said that, being very well reordered in terms of pre-commencement and during construction, during operation and post, it does lead to a little bit of confusion over, for example, surface water drainage. So we'll have a little look at that as we go through. Gosh, that was a long lead-in to a method I use, which is very simply just take them one at a time. I'll put out my concerns, I'll take your positions. Clearly, I don't think we're going to be struggling with the idea of the implementation or indeed the 40-year temporary permission. I was a bit worried initially that I hadn't seen that the local planning authority were aware that took place, but that is within that condition, which is
the only comment I had, I was slightly surprised to read the planning permission hereby granted rather than the development hereby permitted. But that's a matter maybe for you.
I do tend to, conditions come from so many different sources, they always have very different lead-ins, particularly pre-commencement conditions, and I tend to make them consistent.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a sort of minor drafting point that will depend on yours / the Secretary of State's style.
Yeah. Condition 3 is the decommissioning condition, and I know there had been concerns from interested parties about how decommissioning would be controlled, and this does include the restoration of that site, part of the site, to agricultural use. I don't know if it's me, but it does appear to say the approved scheme of restoration twice, and I'm just fully implemented within the times. I think they are identical, those two sentences in the middle. I had to read it 2 or 3 times just to check there wasn't anything slightly different between them.
I mean, it deals with 2 eventualities, doesn't it?
Well, then there is also the 12-month no use.
Yeah.
Yeah. In other schemes, I have found that condition brought forward because of council concerns that it's a white elephant built solely for the purpose of some form of grant that might be available in the future. I'm not saying anything like that.
I mean, the only situation I can think of is that if there was some catastrophic failure of the panels, the technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's to stop damaged panels looking horrific in a field. We would be required to go out and replace them, which is we would do anyway, obviously.
Yeah, and it was decided, for example, that as it was year 35, it wasn't really economic to replace all the panels or something. Then obviously the decommissioning ought to be brought forward to year 35 rather than wait till year 40. But that's the only situation which I thought it might spring into action.
Yeah, no, I mean that's interesting. It's been used in the concern that it's built but never switched on.
Yeah, that's yes.
We don't have any evidence of that here, but we're very happy to accept the condition.
The only question that we should lead to is whether the appellants accepted it.
We do, yes.
We've discussed it.
Yes.
So I've switched on. We're now on an additional microphone, which may turn the lights off or the aircon or lock us all in. So apologies if that.
Okay. Plans are fine. I have to be honest, I haven't cross-referenced back to make sure that they were the fully date plans, but I really hope they are because we've been through this a little bit. So we can there were plans that I thought For example, the typical fence detail plans, etc., that I thought were more illustrative than necessarily development
Yeah,
plans.
I've made a minor track change from the version that I was emailed,
Okay.
which says and shall be carried out in general accordance with, or wording to that effect, because we do have a later condition regarding materials and details of those building sections, etc., etc. Whether you prefer that as a separate condition underneath.
Well, the typical ones, I think, can be general accordance with.
That's exactly what we proposed.
But the location plan, the block plan, and the site layout drawing ought to be the approved plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're not suggesting it should be in general accordance with the site location plan.
Generally in that area.
Yeah.
Does that make me question whether beyond the first three, they shouldn't actually be within that? You should have a complete accordance, and then if you've got conditions, there are conditions that deal with the detail of things like the fencing and the materials used
Yes.
for.
They could be in a separate condition.
Notwithstanding X, Y, and Z plans, details of A, B, C shall be submitted. Do you mean, or?
I mean, I don't think there'd be anything to stop them being in the same condition, but the condition would simply have two parts to it.
Where's that?
Yeah.
There's one that's explicitly about the final location, design and materials to be used in the arrays, inverters, control room, substations, power, HVAC, fencing and any other permanent
That's
infrastructure.
17.
So that's 17, where in fact all of what's on those plans is up for review effectively. Two ways of doing this. One, it could be quite a complicated plans condition. One saying in complete accordance with ABC and in general accordance with D, E and F. Or you have in 17, notwithstanding plans X, Y and Z.
I don't think we have a preference. They amount to the same thing.
Well, or a hybrid. You could say in 17, no development shall take place until full details, blah, 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 blah. The details submitted shall be in accordance with that shown on plans D, E, F and G.
Yeah, you can, much like the sort of landscaping ones.
Yeah. Otherwise, the typical plans, in effect, cease to have any relevance.
Well,
strictly.
yeah. What concerns me slightly is the imprecision of saying you can carry something out in general accordance with the site layout plan. There is a sort of element of precision and an element of people being confident that the decision has been taken by that.
I don't think we'd ever end up with that situation, because you'd have a complete accordance with site layout.
We would have to,
Strict
but
accordance with
then
site layout.
it becomes quite a torturous plans.
Well, yes, and then you probably would have a condition 5, which said a new condition 5 saying general accordance with typical plans A, B, C, D,
Yeah.
rather than having an unwieldy. And you could include the landscaping condition on that list if you wanted.
Yes.
So then it's clear what you're in accordance with and general accordance with plan plan. Of course, the landscaping condition will be referenced later anyway.
Yes, it will.
It's on the landscape for specific landscape.
You mean the landscape layout plan?
Management
Landscape
plan.
strategy plan.
Yeah.
Landscape strategy plan.
Yes, CD 5.11 finished. It's my
Paragraph 5. Note 5, I mean.
indeed.
Apologies to the occasional silence, just in terms of the admin. If I don't take very good notes, when I do eventually come to think about putting these conditions together, I need to make sure that I can remember what we've spoken about and have agreed. Okay, so in principle, a two-part plan's condition, the second part can be then easily tracked through to specific conditions that allow for an agreement with the local authority over finalised details of landscape strategy, fencing, materiality for the structures, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. If I take you to condition 5, I've written tailpiece. I do write tailpiece on a lot of conditions.
2009 Wire Forest and the Co-op. I was in it. Actually, I'm in the tailpiece case, yeah. For the council.
It goes a little bit further with condition 5 though, because actually it's got a direct link to condition 6. In that, carry out in accordance with the appraisal plans, ecological appraisal, but then you also then have to check the ecological appraisal plans, possibly alter and change the plans. What was my suggestion on this one?
On a minor admin point, if
Okay.
I look at condition 5, it references preliminary ecological appraisal
Yeah.
by ACON dated April 21. We've checked the documents and that document doesn't exist, we don't think, for this application.
That
Or at least it's very, very well hidden,
Right.
if it is.
Because our ecology was undertaken by SLM.
Yeah,
rather than
so
ACON.
Well, that's
We-
a giveaway, isn't it?
we would suggest that the word starting with preliminary and then ending with and after April 2021 is removed, and then it refers to sections 5 and 6 of the environmental statement, October 2021.
Is that a casualty of the recycling of conditions?
I suspect.
Although that says environmental statement by ACON. Okay.
Yeah, all by
That's okay.
ACOMs need to be deleted.
So it's chapter 5 and 6 of the ES.
That relates to the ecological matters and then the conclusion. And for completeness, it's probably worth referencing both because
Yeah.
And you probably need a more specific reference than the ES. So it should be the, I'm just trying to find the date, the environmental statement dated October 2021.
It should be carried out in accordance with the recommendation of litigation enhancements set out in. I mean, I suppose you could have condition 6 starts notwithstanding condition 5, but
Yes.
in effect what it's saying, and it quite rightly says, and I would have insisted that it was there, is that since 2021 when those ecological surveys were carried out, the world may have changed.
There may be a lot more dormice.
And therefore, not further full surveys are required, but check surveys are required,
Yes.
which makes entire sense in condition 6. The problem is if you tied yourself into condition 5,
That's only a problem if you have to do less. It shouldn't be a problem if you have to do more, because condition 6 could be worded in a way that said essentially do minimum is established in the environmental statement. And if you need to do more, then that's fine. So you do at least the ES measures. The only problem would be our problem if we are asked to do mitigation that's no longer than necessary. But that's if you don't need to put back boxes, but you do it anyway. It's not really a
Could
problem.
we say at the end of condition 5, carried out in accordance with the recommendations ES ... unless further work required under condition 6 below.
Then it's just, condition 6 is acting like a tailpiece for 5, isn't it? It's all very important.
Well, because it's the updating surveys, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of probably right. The least likely, almost vanishingly small likelihood is that you find that there's less ecology on the site and therefore you need to do
You're mitigating something you
less
don't need to mitigate, but that's not a
in
problem.
accordance with what was set out in October.
Yeah.
If an additional skylark nesting area is found in the surveys, and you'll ecologist says that you have to have another area for ground nesting birds set out in field D. Gosh, I'm making this up. Please don't take this as necessary. Then that can be added. But
well, yes, and that's the sense of condition 6.
It is.
If the survey results identify material change, then blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can live with that as long as that reference is correct, and I'll do a double check on it on the reference. Thank you. That's dealt with 5 and 6. The only thing I have between 7 and, I think it's 9 now, 7 and now, is that you use the same terminology. Construction Environment Management Plan, Construction Environment Management Plan, biodiversity. But it's fine, it makes sense ultimately. I think they're sometimes now called Construction Transport Management Plans, Construction Environmental Management Plans.
I think, sorry, the construction traffic management plan would align with the draft that's been submitted with the application of the appeal. We could change the wording if we needed to. Sorry, I may be jumping ahead. On
Condition 7.
Condition 7.
Yeah.
You're right, there are no actual environmental measures within that condition. They are all...
Yeah, only dust and
yeah.
emissions. The rest of it is about how you manage your transport to and from the site. It doesn't matter what a plan's called, it's what it does. It's only the first time I read it, I thought, oh, they're asking for 2 construction environmental management plans. Just for interested parties, that condition 7 is the one that it does include that routing of HGVs to the site. With the routing in place, there is a potential enforcement route for the council if so reported that the appellants are not complying with that condition. The challenge for the appellants is that often it's third parties, not themselves, who are providing the HGV service, and there's an interface that has to happen on that. But that is the condition that introduces the required routing to and from the site.
And so, again, for local residents who expressed a concern about it, that's also the condition that will fix the hours and days of delivery to and from the site, and the hours and days of working on the site.
So if you look at point, I think it's I on there, delivery, demolition and construction working hours.
Yeah.
So that's a discussion and debate that happens between the company and the council, which it's up to the council how far they consult on it, but
yes,
their environmental...
there is no statutory requirement to do public consultation on the discharge of these conditions, but no doubt if a local ward member were to put a marker on the file saying, I should like to be consulted, please, that would no doubt be effective.
Any other comments on that one? It includes an implementation clause, which is helpful, often don't. Thank you. 8. I can understand why this has come forward as a condition. I think there might be an issue around precision.
I would hate to steal thunder. We suggested it might be better to focus the survey on the areas of concern, as it were, so perhaps focusing on the area from Toaster Road to the site entrances.
I think it needs precision for your point of view.
We needed to define a stretch of highway at the very least.
Because I don't know where the HGVs might be coming from, but you might find yourself responsible for the M1.
Yes,
indeed.
yes.
Whereas it is a better defined stretch of road, I would say, from Toaster Road into the site, and there is a significant amount of traffic along Toaster Road as it is. It's going to be difficult to assess what damage has been caused or otherwise on that stretch of road, which is out with anything that would have happened already.
I did wonder whether the motion plan gave us an appropriate definition, but I think even that's possibly too different. So if I look at the motion plan, it's from the turn-off from the north-south Toaster Road. How does that feel, Mr. Richards, from the council point of view? I know what the council are trying to get to here.
Yes, perhaps, Councillor Cooper, do you want to just come and sit next to me here for a minute?
So there's a lot of shorthand went on there. I think my concern is that a condition must be what's known as precise, and at the moment that condition
They're going to agree to survey the route before, so that we can have a record. But the inspector's point is, where do we want to start? The M1, which is not very. So I think what's been suggested would be from this. Is this where Toaster Road meets?
Is it the first 90-degree bend where you go?
It's from the north to south.
From the north to south,
Yeah.
first 90-degree bend turning west.
And that takes you past the walnut tree.
Past the walnut tree. So
Once-
that's where the survey. That's where the surveying would start from.
I
Yeah.
think the concern was specifically around Blisworth Road and around Gayton, wasn't it? Which is actually all in the far east, west of that. I'm sorry.
No?
I, if I may.
You can say whatever you want. Yes, go for it.
Thank you. If I may, I think I would agree here that we do need to bring it slightly further back, so where it comes off of the Toaster Road, turns right into Station Road.
Yeah, so we're talking about the same.
We're talking about the same point, yes.
Yeah, so you go over the railway and then the turning's on to your right, and it would be.
Yes,
From
there.
immediately, you
Yes.
land off the railway.
Yeah. And then you would drive up Station Road. The holding area is on your left or right. I can't remember which.
Right.
And then you go underneath the A43 and hard left. Yeah.
The holding area.
Is there not a?
Not on Station Road.
Not stationary. I'm thinking of something
No,
else.
there's the weight restricted bridges which are noted. The holding it. So the intention,
Yeah,
just for sort of to give a bit more clarity on the holding area, that would be as you come off the M1 where there's clearly space for lorries to wait.
Yeah. Okay.
They then phone, come in. Please ensure you follow the route, etc., etc., etc. You are fine to proceed.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Sorry. Yes. No. A red herring from me. I thought there was another holding area here. Right. Okay.
So, does someone have a stab at giving me some words to follow construction traffic route?
So I'll read the first part of the condition in full for ease.
Yeah.
No development shall take place, brackets including demolition, close brackets, until a highway condition survey of the construction traffic route from Toaster Road to the site entrances has been undertaken and provided to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. We then move on to the second half of the condition, which relates to the post-construction.
I don't want to undermine what you just said, but in terms of the construction traffic route might need an express reference to as approved under condition 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, because while a lot of work's been done to define that as the route, and it's not impossible.
No, that actually when coming to discharge that condition, the highway authority may ask for something else.
Yeah.
We did have a conversation with Mr. Burton. Granted, he's not here, so careful putting too much emphasis on that. But we felt it was better to have that as a separate condition rather than just incorporating it into the CTMP.
I think I agree, because CMP has a finite life to an extent, whereas this is actually this requires a post-construction element as well.
It felt like it would make it a somewhat clunky condition if you then only sort of from our perspective, from the council's perspective, this way is neater. It discharges one condition, then you move on to the other rather than having a part discharge and all that sort of process.
Mr. Richards, does that work from your perspective? You can see what
Yes.
my concern was, and I think that's...
No, and I was just turning away to look at my email inbox. I know that Mr. Burton is watching us, and I'm expecting my email inbox to light up if we do anything that meets with his disapproval.
And then, without wishing to jump ahead too quickly, but we probably need to add into the second half of that condition after the what it says within 6 months of the construction phase, etc., highways condition survey. Probably add in that wording of the construction traffic as approved under condition 7, so it gives a definition of the area where we are undertaking the post-construction survey.
Well, it just needs to say of the approved construction route. No, of the. Then I get back into my precision problem. Post-construction high-rise conditions. Of that route.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as there's some reference in there to what the route is.
Yeah. Yes, because the intention is that if any work is required, it's only to that section of the route that it could be required.
And there is further remedy under the Highways Act, I am told by motion, should there be any other...
That they can do works and then charge us for it
The
later.
recharge. This is
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Very good, thank you. And then we get our other construction environment management plan. Brackets biodiversity. Having said that, I haven't picked up anything. Happy.
So there are two ways of dealing with biodiversity net gain. One of them is to include another letter in 9 to require measures to achieve gain, measurable gain, and another is to, as option 1, and option 2 would be to include a freestanding condition more akin to new works, but in new works, so you were blessed with a plan, a very detailed plan that you could simply approve, whereas we don't have that here. So you've got two options. I think one is to require the CEMP to include the scheme for achieving measurable biodiversity net gain, and the other is to have a freestanding condition which requires exactly the same thing to be submitted.
I think freestanding, because this is a construction.
Exactly. That's
whereas the BNG is really operational.
Yes, it will in part be implemented during construction, but also post-construction there will be a requirement for further
maintenance probably as well. Yeah. Of the
Yes.
It's not just establishing the gain and going,
I mean,
I've
condition-
done it. It's about maintaining it as well.
I think
part of the new works issue was it's all very well saying you're going to do these hedgerows, but they're just going to die if you don't look after them.
I mean, condition 9 is really about preventing damage, whereas
Yeah.
That's right.
BNG is about adding value.
Condition 10. Because that talks about landscape ecological.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, there are allowed
It's
3
the
management
length, yeah.
Length, yeah.
Length rather than the check.
Could be
That is the post-construction one.
I've not heard the acronym check.
No,
sorry,
I
that
couldn't
has to
resist it.
I'm going to try and use that one.
Yeah.
It does make it a more complicated condition.
Absolutely happy to have a freestanding condition. No dogs in that fight. So.
Well, let's deal with what we have, and then if those that we may need to add, we'll see whether they sit better within existing additions or whether they need to stand alone. The landscape and ecology management plan, and the difficulty is definitions here. We've obviously got another separate proposal to review the landscape strategy plan. We've got proposals to revisit the ecology surveys and change the plans to deal with ecology surveys, and now we're suggesting there's a landscape and ecology management plan as well. Now the management plan could be about long-term protection, long-term maintenance. It just feels that we have a number of plans that kind of have an interface.
Yes.
And I just want to be careful that we don't leave the operator in a position where they're unsure which plan is doing which. So there's an element of precision.
So I think is 10 supposed to be about the long-term maintenance of the plan that you get under 12? same time.
Well, yes, I mean, I'm just looking at the reason. The reason for
There's actually habitats and biodiversity.
Yeah,
the
it's
reason
less
for
landscape.
10 is ecology,
Yeah.
and the reason for 12 is landscape.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think 12 is quite explicit. That's about saying there's a landscape strategy plan, but how far the trees should extend might well be something that's worth having a discussion. Sorry, the
And the
extent of
species
tree
as
and
well,
the transfer to scrub
Yeah.
is a matter that could still do with a little bit more debate. I think that's what that's trying
Yes,
to do.
yes, it is. Yeah.
The landscape ecology management plan is trying to say, whatever you've thrown in there, I want it to be as good as it can be at the end of the period.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think it's more ecology focused. But then we already have, well, we have the implementation of the measures, ecology measures.
Might make more sense to the readers if 12 came before 10.
Yes, you wait till we get up to the surface water management.
Oh, yeah.
Drainage.
Okay, I think the point is, this operator, were they to go ahead, should be bound by delivering all of the ecological improvements they have claimed they will deliver on the site. That isn't just the biodiversity net gain, that's the ecological improvements that have been identified as necessary. They should then be bound to make sure that they aren't just thrown in and forgotten about and wither and die. So there needs to be some methodology for a long-term management plan. Whether that LEMP is sufficient as defining that, I'll have a think about. That's perhaps the safest way to say it rather than spend too much time on it.
So we would have the LEMP, however you want to describe it, plus another freestanding biodiversity action.
Because the biodiversity net gain is not the sum total of the ecological measures across the site, it's very specifically meadowlands and hedgerows, and in order to gain the benefit, there should be a condition that ensures that the benefit is achieved. I think it may need to remain as a standalone, simply because it's easier to measure those parts if it's a standalone condition.
Yes. And to be monitored at appropriate intervals to check that it is still achieving the benefit.
Yeah.
Because that's what BNG is all about.
Yeah. Okay. Time for a note. Okay, any further comments on 10? Happy to leave it to me, or did you...
So just a typing error in 12, while we're dealing with landscape strategy, it should refer to revision C rather than revision G. That's just a typographical error.
Oh, okay. So those are C's, not...
I thought it was a G.
It's G for the G, I think, is from the site
Oh
layout.
yes, it's the site layout.
G is site
Yeah,
layout.
sorry. Yeah.
I don't think we should leap over 11.
No, sorry, so no.
11 has a question mark from me that says necessity.
It has the same question mark from the appellants, so far as I understand it.
Yes.
The reason why it is there, so I understand, is because the council's EHO has still not signed off the latest noise report, or the updated noise report, and is therefore asking for a further noise report. As I understand it, the appellants say, no, what you've now got, but haven't yet signed off, is the last word. Is that correct?
Well, you've got 3 documents. We've got a noise assessment, a noise rebuttal, and the tranquility report. So we say that's enough to make a decision about noise generation and impact of that. There's 2 points. One is we say that's enough, full stop. So you don't need to do another noise assessment in terms of survey work because that's been done. And we've got enough to reach a view as to whether that's adequate or not. And until, I think, 2 days ago, we didn't realise that the council was pursuing any case that wasn't adequate. We haven't had any evidence to support that. That's point 1. The second point is more of a drafting point, sir. If you were minded to require further survey work, there's some imprecision in the drafting of that condition which I would like to draw to your attention, which is about about halfway through the second line in that condition, to ensure that the noise does not affect the local amenity, ... To my mind, that is opening a Pandora's box of debate at discharge stage because, you know, the policy that is said to support that condition would require permission to be refused for development which had a significant adverse effect on amenity, and this condition goes beyond that to require no effect on amenity, and then obviously query what amenity means. It's an amorphous concept. So what I don't want to do is end up back at appeal about whether that condition should be discharged or not. If the environmental health team at the council thinks that what they have at the moment in terms of survey work demonstrates an unacceptable effect on local amenity, we should have had that evidence. If they think it's fine, then we don't need the condition. And if they think they need further survey work, then all they're going to get is what we've done again. So it seems to me to sort of boil down to a request for a little bit more time to sign off on something they've had for about a year. So those are our points really on that condition.
Mr. Richards.
I'm not able to give an explanation as to why we don't have a definitive answer on the basis of the information submitted to date.
Excuse me, Mr. Robbins, only Miss Hall seems to be using her microphone.
Thank you very
Sorry, missing out on.
Mayor Culper.
Yeah, no, they do switch off. Mine's usually been quite well behaved. Mine has done that.
No, mine keeps on shutting me up. I'm afraid I don't have an explanation from the EHO.
Okay. I have no substantive evidence that the noise surveys were insufficient to categorise the noise across the site, and I don't have any evidence that that has led to would lead to a harmful impact.
No.
I have concerns, some of which I think were around the perception of there being battery storage systems on the site potentially. I don't know. What's a way forward for this? I agree with you on the wording. You can't just have a condition that says, effectively, a site shall be entirely silent. It's got to be appropriate within existing background levels and distance to receptors and appropriate measures against WHO standards, etc. At receptors. And I have some considerable doubts about whether it's necessary. Because the fact that a report hasn't been signed off for a scheme that's gone through the council and a decision has been made at the council that it didn't include a reason for refusal around noise, and then has had the time to go on to the appeal process and still doesn't appear to be signed off, makes me wonder, A, whether there's actually any problem with the noise survey out there, and if there was, why I haven't heard about it.
Yes, well, we don't have any evidence. I'm now being told that the issue may be around surveying against background noise levels at the weekend.
Is that a particular receptor in mind? Or,
I don't know.
So if you were minded to include something, I think we'd ask that at least be amended to significantly adverse effect on amenity at a particular receptor, rather than just sort of broadly anywhere, anybody ever. So, for example, if the concern were residents in canal boats on the canal, that would be a sensitive receptor you could specify, but we don't know what the concern is. Yeah, and obviously the canal residents of canal boats were assessed.
Yes.
I'm not sure I can take it much further. I don't have any evidence I can put before you.
Okay. We'll leave it like this.
The concern is the residential plots on the eastern side of Gayton. It's the southern parcel. I'm told is the concern.
The residential properties, for example, Three Chimneys, where we visited.
And I'm told that it's not internal noise levels. It's garden noise level.
Okay. Okay. Let's leave it like this. I will, as part of my assessment of the scheme, look at noise implications. I'll look at the noise evidence that's before me. If I feel that there is sufficient within the 3 reports that Ms Hall has referred to consider that noise has been properly dealt with, then I don't think there's a necessity for that condition. If I think that there is a potential risk that can be mitigated,
Well,
this is the problem,
yes.
that can be mitigated through further surveys to categorise it and then measures to mitigate it, then it can be a valid condition.
Might be a very high acoustic fence.
I was trying to avoid going into what the mitigation might be, but there are other alternatives within solar farms, which is the repositioning of the transformer elements, but not the panels themselves, but the associated infrastructure. There could be relocated at distance from receptors.
I think
if that's
normally
the
in the
issue.
middle of the site anyway.
They do tend to be, or at the end of packs of rows.
But I don't think there's anything proposed that I've seen that looks obviously too close.
Subject to the final layout conditions.
Well, yes, quite.
Yeah. So I think the best I can say is I will review the noise evidence on the basis of I'm having to assess the proposal as to whether there's acceptable or unacceptable levels of noise associated with it. If the question mark remains and I can craft a condition that has a outcome that would mitigate the potential for harm, then I'll think about that.
Thank you.
I think an open condition like this is very difficult for the applicants to achieve compliance with.
Yes.
Well, solar farms are fairly passive systems. You know, there are some noise elements within them, hence the fact there is noise assessments there. And expecting silence is not achievable. But I'll look at the evidence. Okay, thank you for that. The landscape strategy plan, and just an update on that. I mean, I think we had discussion between the landscape witnesses who accepted that, you know, there are tweaks and potential enhancements that can be made if the scheme were to go ahead. And I think that condition just gives you that slight flexibility to work beyond the existing landscape strategy plan. Any comments on it?
As a minor last minute point, you should refer to Rev C rather than Rev G.
Yeah, I've got the note on that one. Thank
Rev
you.
G is the layout plan, Rev C is the ones.
Thank you very much. I did search a little bit for the classic landscape element of what happens if they fail within 5 years. But that appears then later in the way that the conditions have been structured. So there's that sort of slight disparate element of some conditions that you normally see paired, not being paired in this form. 13 deals with the first of the surface water drainage system conditions. There also being 16 and 19. Surface water drainage is necessary, and I'm assuming that you're accepting the principle of presenting a surface water drainage scheme.
Yes, happy with the principle, and it's something that we would deliver on solar sites anyway, so there's no issues there with the principle of it.
And that's obviously relevant both to some runoff issues associated with the panels themselves, which is where you get some concentrated fall of runoff from the panel, but also with the odd building structures that there are by necessity throughout it. The reason why I was struggling a bit was that when we go to 16, you actually have to decide how you're going to maintain it before you design it, in the order the conditions have been written.
I think this is probably a casualty of the
attempt
to split it all up.
Yeah.
A la PPG, whereas a composite surface water drainage condition might be easier to draft.
Standard, including maintenance and verification, single surface water drainage condition might be a simpler answer, because you can actually build it and complete construction before we need to verify it. So I think if there's an agreement there, I think I can, gosh, anyway, long ago, back in the days of PPG 25, if anyone remembers those, I was working on surface water drainage conditions for Syria. So I think I can probably find one from the archives. It'll make the conditions simpler to discharge to, I believe, because rather than discharging 3 at different points within the process, you could do it in one. Unless, Mr. Richards, you've been given some message that there's a reason for that.
No, I suspect it's because of the divided up into pre-commencement, other, and then operational.
Okay, very good. 14, tree protections. Can't see a problem, unless there's some wording in there that I've missed.
In Part B... Sorry, in Part B,
yes.
it says effectively in accordance with British standard. It then repeats the British standard. We just thought for ease of simplicity of the wording at the end of that part of the condition could come out. So where it is, that is steel mesh panels, ... The rest of that could come out.
I think partly because we haven't been able to check whether that is what the British standard says.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, so defining 2.3 metres tall, 0.6 metres depth, etc., you think
Yeah.
is unnecessary levels of provision because the British standard sets it out.
Yeah.
Yes, and presumably you could include or successor document after that if you were so minded, because there may be an update to the BS.
Does that make sense, Mr. Richard?
Yes, because it's tautological at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Big word.
Just shake it off. This is about coasts.
Thank you. 15. Gosh, I've got a note that I can't read. Oh, simply because there was a county archaeologist, whose Mordu, wasn't there, note that provided that condition. I think that replicates it. So I think that's okay. I had a floating note that said, check that there's the archaeology condition. Okay, we have the second of our surface water drainage, which means designing it after you've constructed. That's fine. I'll deal with that. 17 is our kind of notwithstanding the plans that we've said you're going to be in general conformance with. You're going to give us further design details of, I think, everything. Control room, substations, power conversion, HVAC unit. Typically associated with the battery storage. Is there an HVAC? Yeah.
Yeah, there's no need for an HVAC unit.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's a battery thing.
It is a battery thing. Mr. Richards, I'm sure that the council were looking for this condition just to make sure that they absolutely pin down the materials that are going to be used. Are you happy with it?
Yes. Does it? It does control of fencing, doesn't it?
It definitely says fencing.
Yes. So that's it.
So full details of fencing.
Yeah.
And
so
fencing would be the deer fencing.
Yeah, but that's exactly right. The note we were being passed just now was all about the deer fencing, but the answer is the details will be approved under that condition. So that's fine.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, I didn't pick that up.
So, the only plan we've seen has concrete, well, posts setting concrete at the ends of the runs of fence, and in between it just says round posts. Now, if those are wooden, they're going to need replacing when they rot. But there was no mention of strategy there.
Right. Well, I would say that an operator whose deer-proof fence was not deer-proof runs a massive risk of loss.
Yeah.
Now, you're absolutely right. It should be ensured that it's maintained properly, but in those sorts of circumstances, the council can agree the quality of the materials that are used and the long-term maintenance. But it's very much in their interest for that to be the case.
It was also a major point that there would be very little concrete work in the ground for solar panels mountains.
Yeah.
But no mention of that strategy for the fencing.
Well, it's unavoidable that you need some footings for fencing.
Yeah.
Unavoidable for it to stand up. But the council have the opportunity to review how that's to be delivered.
Yeah.
And in fact, the depth of those posts it would be concreted in and very close to the limit for where the pipeline can cover.
Yeah, the pipeline's quite explicit on the ground. I made sure that I could see it and track its route, and quite clearly the appellants are aware of its route too, because it's on every plan, and therefore will be within the fencing design plan. 18 takes us to this interesting issue of proposed security systems. Right, there's a first question. Hang on, am I on the right one? Yes, the security system. What's the genesis of this as a condition? Because I've not come across it before in a solar farm circumstance.
So it's because normally you would have CCTV and lighting as part of the security
Yes.
system. We're not proposing that. We're proposing, it sounds a bit James Bond, like lasers.
Okay.
So we don't need lighting, and we don't need...
Oh, that answers a later question. That comes up.
Yes,
Thank
so
you.
yeah, so there won't be lighting, but because it's a different sort of a system, we have a broader condition relating to security system as a broad term.
That makes sense now. That
It
makes
somewhat
sense.
relates back to comments on the planning application when the request was made for full details of the entire sort of CCTV and security system. Now, for obvious reasons, you wouldn't want to put certain security details in the public domain because it undermines the principle of, well, a security system. But, well, I mean, we are happy to provide the general details of as
Okay.
The local concerns were understandably enough over lighting and CCTV.
Yes. Yes.
Which we
And later on I had a comment that said, would you not prefer a lighting submission of a lighting scheme as opposed to no external lighting?
Oh,
Yeah.
But I now understand why
Yeah.
that's
we did with that, yeah.
um,
And it's not supposed to be a James Bond laser system that cuts you in half.
Not supposed to.
Not supposed to be. But if you take illegal intimate aside.
how disappointing. Okay. Yes, visions of red lines flying in different angles.
I don't think that's what we're proposing.
Okay, that's helpful. That explains to me why these stand slightly different to others I've seen. 19 was the third of the surface water drainage conditions. 20. Details of signage. A number of solar farms do put in information boards. I think this is what we're probably talking about, are we?
I think so, yes. So, yes, I think this is something that we would normally do. Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. Good. Okay, and then here we get the completion of the landscaping conditions, i.e. implementation, how, when and what happens if they die. The only time actually that I am relatively content with a tailpiece of sort is in the landscaping conditions. 22. Is this not a requirement in condition 12? If not, would it not be better there? This is all species shall be native species of UK provenance. You're having to give the detail of the species in condition 12.
Very happy to strike a line.
Why would there be another condition? I'm happy if someone can explain it. I just ask him a question.
No, I suspect, again, it's a result of trying to carve up conditions amongst different headings.
Because condition 12 includes details of proposed shrub, tree planting, including their species, number, size and position. So it can be included there, unless it's felt necessary that it's delivered separately.
This is 21.
This was 21. All species used in planting proposals shall be native species of UK provenance.
I think it should be in condition 12.
In theory, you could comply with condition 12 with non-native species and then fail to comply with.
They wouldn't sign, the council then wouldn't sign off if that's what you want native species, or you would just not sign off the management plan.
Yes, but I guess it's it says an argument if it's details of UK native species.
Plant a load of Christmas trees.
No, that's probably the concern.
Good. Always nice to get rid of one or two. Oh, hang on, that was 22, wasn't it? Not 21.
Yeah.
22, that was. 21 is fairly standard landscaping implementation. Ah, yes, so does this also link to the no CCTV proposal and saying you can't come in through the back door of a GP? Okay. All right.
We've had a conversation on that condition and there's no issues raised.
Thank you. 24 was an interesting one. Just suddenly, because typically I see contaminated land survey requests and there isn't one here. We've got to the third part of the contaminated land condition without the first two parts. But I'm assuming that it's simply there as a catch.
I don't think there's any suggestion that this includes contaminated.
I think the point must... I could only consider that this is an appropriate way of dealing with this condition if it has been felt that there is no chance of there being contaminated land on the site.
It's all agriculture, like,
Although we did spot the landfill just the other side of the canal.
Too, but we weren't sure.
No, it is.
It is.
Yeah, on the other side of the railway.
Other side of the canal.
Yeah, where you
Yeah.
have the boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been methane collection there,
That's-
clearly, and
that's-
leachate collection.
Yeah.
That's what we thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
You confirmed. Yeah, you're right.
But I think the canal is probably a reasonable buffer between the two. The question I always have is whether the opponents are happy with that, because it's a slightly left field condition in that form. And that explains to me all these scribble notes that I have for 25. I'm just going to, I think, leave it, other than it does have without the prior express permission of the local planning authority added to the end of it.
Yes. Like you, I'm relaxed about tailpieces on schemes to be agreed, because in
Yes.
effect it's just a resubmission of a new scheme to be agreed.
Yeah.
But I think that probably is a co-op and Wild Forest tailpiece.
Oh, you just don't need it. Because obviously if you granted permission...
It's
you
been
wouldn't
granted on the
granting it
basis
permission
of, of no external lights. Yeah.
Yeah. You just don't need the tailpiece, because we wouldn't be applying under the tailpiece, you'd apply properly.
Permission. Yeah.
Yeah.
You would apply for.
Well, I wouldn't know.
There's no reason why you couldn't apply for permission for a light if, for
No.
example, health and safety dictated that
Yes, absolutely.
a spot required
But we'd
a.
need to make a full planning permission for it, and then that
Yeah.
would, yes,
Yeah.
supersede that condition anyway.
Yes.
Good.
I mean, at least that tailpiece does say it's planning permission that's required, but it's just not necessary.
I can scribble out the other notes because I thought the opponents would be more comfortable with a submission of a lighting scheme, so that's excellent. Thank you.
And then you can delete all of the informatives.
Yeah, I think that was just people who didn't quite understand. Inspectors
It's
don't do informatives except in the body of the text.
it's there for completeness. That's fine. I had a potential other condition, and I'll see whether anyone else has others. I did go and check back, and there is 2 visibility display requirements for the construction period, one of which is achievable but still requires verge and hedgerow changes. And I think that there probably should be a delivery of a visibility display condition. Without it, it's motherhood and apple pie territory. Yes, of course we'll give you these visibility displays, but actually nothing to enforce that you do so.
Yes, I agree.
I don't think we object to that.
I'll just ask whether there's others. I'll also just check a few notes that I took as we went through the inquiry, but I think the notes that I took of potential additional conditions have been picked up within those conditions. The pre and post of the route, size of vehicles over turnover bridge. No, I think that's within the agreed construction environment management plan.
Yes.
Transport. Is mitigation of permanent conditions? Yes. The BNG condition then.
Yeah.
Sorry, the visibility display conditions will refer quite simply to that transport statement, which
And there's, I thought there were some plans on there.
CD 1.27A, which actually gives you a plan of both. Yes, it is. It's CD 1.27A.
Yes. Got A, B and C visibility display plans, but I don't know whether... Why aren't they secured?
Yes, there are 3 plans, 27A, B and C.
Yeah.
I confess that I have not opened them for a while.
Yes, and when I looked at them, I think a couple certainly would require works to the verge and hedges.
So yeah, I suppose we need a visibility display condition that requires almost either, rather than securing these plans, because you normally then enter into sort of, I don't know whether we need a 278 agreement to do these things with the Highway Authority. I don't know to what extent Because when you do 278 plans, usually there's then changes of, you do it with a particular level of detail that sometimes changes things. So the options are either a freestanding highways display condition, or having the securing these plans under condition 5? Not 5. 4.
I mean, the simplest way is probably should say in accordance with the plans. I wouldn't want to put it unless otherwise agreed differently with the Highways Authority. I mean, I think it is section 278. Sorry, those visibility displays need to be secured as a minimum. If your section 278 requires that something different is done, it won't be less.
No, probably not. No.
They've been agreed by the Highways Authority as providing sufficient visibility for the speeds along that road, those roads, and therefore I think they should be secured to be there.
And they're by and large they're construction traffic driven, aren't
All
they?
construction traffic driven.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think.
Yes, because the proposal is then to replace that hedgerow that had to come out to achieve the visibility.
Yes, it is.
By operational stage.
And then when you've got the twice a month 4x4 visit,
you just need a field access.
you just need a field access. Yeah.
Good. BNG.
Well, we haven't got a.
I have got new works. There we go. You're right. There was a post-development retention plan.
Yes, and we haven't got one of those or the equivalent here, I don't think.
No, we don't.
Therefore, we need it to be submitted and approved and then implemented. And then monitored.
It was a commitment made there. I'm not sure it was the first. It's possibly the first time I'd had that commitment made in a solar farm application that they would monitor at 1, 5, 10, and 15.
Well, I think I'd be agnostic as to, but it ought to be monitored.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about BNG these days is that it is being offered as a benefit of the scheme in the planning balance.
Explicitly, yeah.
And in this case, it's a whacking great benefit in percentage terms.
195%.
Yeah, whereas we know that the Act that's not yet in force will require 10%.
Yeah.
But even at 10%, the requirement is to monitor and to top up if...
We don't object to a requirement for monitoring. I can't achieve instructions fast enough, I don't think, about the intervals of said monitoring.
Yeah.
But if the requirement under any proposed BNG condition is to submit a scheme...
I think a scheme
to
include a period of monitoring.
Yeah.
To include monitoring intervals.
Yeah. It would do in the scheme to be approved under the condition, but we're not going to fix the intervals now. But it would be another one for you to have a look at when it came into be discharged. Yeah.
Yes, so it could be a bit of a hybrid between 20 and 21 or new works, which effectively says not to deliver that plan, but to submit a scheme. That's the lasers again. To submit a scheme to set out the biodiversity metric, effectively a biodiversity metric plan and delivery of measures to achieve the proposed 195% effectively. And to include agreements for a timetable for delivery and ongoing monitoring.
So yes, if you are minded to include the precise percentage in the condition.
I don't think I am, probably. I think the agreed BNG.
Just because that is done under a particular version of the metric.
Yes, we
And
could
I
be
can't
version.
Tell you, I don't
who
know what
knows
it is under different versions of that metric or what version of the metric might be in place at the implementation stage. So I would encourage not to include a specific percentage because
Yeah.
by the time we come to implement, there may be a metric version 6 point something which could throw out a completely different result.
Yes, but
I think we could say as set out in the biodiversity, the BNG report, because there's a BNG.
Yes, thank you.
so what you're saying is you're committed to delivering the measures set out in the report.
Yes, absolutely,
Yes.
yes.
But
This is how you
whether
do
in
it.
the future that's 195% benefit or
Yeah.
150% benefit or a 250% benefit, depending on how the metrics change, is neither here nor there.
So,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Committed to the measures,
yes.
but not by reference to a percentage on a particular metric.
Yes,
Yeah.
because the metric changes.
Yeah.
And when they change it, they
But the
prioritise
measures,
different things.
but the measures, including the wildflower meadows and
Yes, of course, the measure.
and the hedgerows
Yeah.
and all the rest of it.
You will get that.
That's all committed.
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
So I think reference to the BNG report is the way to go.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Delivering the BNG report. And a timetable for ongoing monitoring to be agreed.
Yeah. Monitoring and
That's
management.
Yes, thank you.
And then an implementation for the measures to be as agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other conditions that have raised their head over the period of inquiry that we perhaps, things gone off again, that we perhaps need to think about?
Not from the council's point of view, I don't know.
It's always entertaining to ask an appellant if they wish to add conditions. Please, more.
Please, more
We've only
negative
got to-
elements to the
We've
scheme.
only got to 27, come on. The answer is no then.
No, I don't think so. So I'm just checking my WhatsApp group because I know that there are people from the client watching the live stream, but I'll just check if there's anybody actively typing. The answer is no, I think. So I'm going to hope that means
No, I
we're
think
okay.
we've taken some out. We've combined some, but I have introduced a few, potentially two extras. As always with conditions, I will review everything that we've said, and I will look at, and there's a couple of very distinct questions that I said I will look at, noise being one, and make decisions on, and then we'll include those and the reasons for them in the report to the Secretary of State. Very good, thank you for that. That took longer than I expected, but I think important to get right to make sure that the scheme, were it to go ahead, has a proper set of conditions to ensure that the relevant mitigation is in place as required. Thank you very much. Let us move on to, I think, closing statements, please. If you hand them out, does anyone want to take a 10-minute break before we dive into them?
I could just do with a small comfort break.
Very good. If you hand them out, let's say we'll pick up, Mr. Richards, on your closing at 11:30.
Thank you very much, sir.
Couple of that,
All right, thank you
very much. And we'll make sure you get a Word version.
Thank you very much. It just goes through the case of the
They were made.
They weren't.
I wasn't expecting to have any of those audio backs.
They weren't many of the other ones. There weren't many of the other ones.
There was someone who was very polite and one audio bite left. There's someone who's very polite and one audio bite left.
See,
I often hear that one.
I could see single audio bands in the packet yesterday, but didn't realise it was the last one. Didn't go for it just because I've seen it.
13 was. Yeah. Tell him to upload it.
We're at past. I'm hoping that we're okay. Councillor Cooper, have we lost Mr. Overton? He is coming. Do you want me to wait?
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you for asking.
You sure?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Richards, thank you for the note. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. These then are the... Oh, I'm getting boom. These then are the closing submissions on behalf of the local planning authority, and they should please be read as following on from those made in opening. The background set out in the opening paragraphs 1 to 7 and 11 should please, for the purposes of your reporting to the Secretary of State, be read in here. And we'll address the two main issues identified by you, sir. Firstly, main issue 1, the effect on the landscape character and appearance of the area. At paragraph 3, I set out Mr. Wadsworth's post-nominal letters as I promised I would do. The parties' experts have agreed a landscape and visual statement of common ground. It sets out the site's context. And it's agreed that effects assessed as moderate or above are significant for the purposes of decision taking. So first, landscape character. Glivia 3 states at 211 and 212 that landscape is important because it provides a shared resource which is important in its own right as a public good and provides the setting for day-to-day lives, for living, working and recreation. It allows opportunities for aesthetic enjoyment and provides a sense of place and has continuity with the past through its relative permanence. Glivia 3 also states that the fact that an area of landscape that is not designated either nationally or locally does not mean that it does not have any value. So far as landscape character is concerned, it's agreed in the Landscape and Visual Statement of Common Ground that the site is not part of any designated landscape and is not a valued landscape for the purposes of NPPF Para 174A. There would be no significant impacts at a national or regional character area level, and no significant impact at a county or district level character area looked at as a whole. The methodology used in the LVIA is agreed. Mr. Wadsworth has adopted its vocabulary for the sake of consistency. Both experts have sought to be objective and transparent, while recognising that professional judgment plays a large part in assessment. The LVIA terminology allows a sense check on the components and outcomes of the process. For example, the definition of adverse landscape effects are found in Table 1.7. Negligible, they are alterations that result in a very slight deterioration to the existing landscape resource, not uncharacteristic within a receiving landscape. Minor are alterations that result in a limited deterioration of the existing landscape resource, and characteristic features would be lost to a limited degree. Moderate, alterations that result in a partial deterioration of the existing landscape resource. Valued characteristic features would be partially lost. And major, alterations that result in a pronounced deterioration of the existing landscape resource. Valued characteristic features would be wholly lost. Having applied the methodology and reached a professional judgment on an individual impact, it's helpful to stand back and compare that judgment with the language in Table 1.7. Is the impact pronounced? Would valued features be wholly lost? If the answer is no, then the sense check suggests that a professional judgment on a major should be revisited. The areas of disagreement are identified at Para 2.5 in the Landscape and Visual Statement of Common Ground and in Table 1. There is disagreement as to the degree of physical benefit to trees and hedgerows resource caused by additional landscape mitigation planting. The dispute centres on whether by year 15 that change should be regarded as limited, i.e. a small magnitude of change, or whether it is partial, a medium magnitude of change. We submit the latter. The dispute on the impact of on the open fields arable land use resource turns on whether the effect is a partial deterioration, i.e. moderate, or pronounced major. Again, we submit the latter. It is agreed that there would be no significant physical impacts to the landscape receptors, public footpaths and public access, and watercourses and water bodies. There is disagreement as to the degree of impact to the character of the site and its immediate vicinity in the local landscape. At the site level, there are differences as to susceptibility. The appellant contends for low, that's to say a site able to accommodate the development with little or no consequence to the site's overall integrity. And the planning authority contends for high, that's to say undue consequences on the site's integrity. Secondly, of a magnitude, year one magnitude of change, the appellant contends for a medium magnitude, that's to say a partial change, and the local authority contends for a large magnitude, that's to say a pronounced one. And then finally a dispute at year 15 on the magnitude of change, the appellant small or limited, the planning authority large or pronounced. Widening the area to include the immediate vicinity of the site, which I note in the footnote is not formally defined, but Mr. Webster accepted about 800 metres or so. So widening the area to include the immediate vicinity of the site, which includes part of the Grand Union Canal Conservation Area, the disagreement centres on year one magnitude, appellant small, planning authority medium / large, and year 15 magnitude, appellant very small, planning authority medium / large. Visual immunity. The LVIA presents two sets or types of photographs, SAP, taken from within the site, and SCP, taken from outside it. The SCP, including those added during the appeal process, form the representative views agreed to be appropriate for your assessment in this case. Of course, there is no substitute for a comprehensive site and area visit, and an agreed site visit route plan was produced, to which Councillor Cooper added some points to visit, having consulted interested local residents. The ZTV is accepted as being a fair representation of the extent of landscape in which views of the proposals may occur. The landscape visual statements of common ground sets out from where it is agreed that receptors will not experience significant effects. And again, the language used in the assessment of visual effects is also set out in the tables of the LVIA methodology. And in table 1.8, the potential overall effects are described, again on a sliding scale, negligible, alterations that typically result in a barely perceptible deterioration in the existing view, minor, a limited deterioration, moderate, typically result in a noticeable deterioration, and major, typically result in a pronounced deterioration in the existing view. And again, the areas of disagreement are best understood by reference to the Statement of Common Ground, para 2.5 and table 2. The first two rows in table 2 concern receptors living, travelling on or walking beside approximately 500 metres of the Grand Union Canal. The canal is not simply important as a designated heritage asset. The local plan makes clear, as have very many local people, that it is an important cultural, recreational and wildlife asset. It's also part of a network of multifunctional green space, giving rise to quality of life benefits. It's a tranquil haven from which to enjoy unspoilt countryside. As well as being an important landscape feature in its own right, the quality of the surrounding landscape is vitally important. These descriptors do not simply apply to a consideration of mooring policy, as was suggested by Mr. Pleasant in re-examination. They are careful and considered statements in the local plan section on protecting and enhancing the canal network. Both Mr. Webster and Mr. Wadsworth agree that the effects in year 1 will be significant. However, Mr. Webster contends that as a result of mitigation planting, the effect in year 15 will not be. Mr. Wadsworth disagrees. You, sir, will be well placed to judge,
having seen a section of the canal on an embankment that would be difficult to plant, and the area proposed for scrub landscape planting some 6 metres below the canal, and the proposed management regime for the scrub. The Council notes a tendency by the appellant during the inquiry to rely on changes to the landscape strategy that might be undertaken when the conditions come to be discharged. We say this does not display confidence in the strategy submitted with the appeal, which has been revised from that submitted with the application. Having regard to Table 1.5 in the LDIA methodology, it is frankly difficult to fathom why Mr Webster should regard those travelling on public rights-of-way RL 001, that's the Northampton round, between Gayton and Anchor Farm, as having anything other than a high sensitivity. Walkers on this local circular route plainly fall full square within the category of people enjoying outdoor recreation, where their attention is likely to be focused on the landscape. The Council also contends for a greater magnitude of change in the view than the appellant's barely perceptible. You, sir, will doubtless have seen for yourself. For those travelling on the public rights-of-way when passing through the site and its immediate vicinity, Mr Webster again downgrades their sensitivity. Inexplicably, he also reduces the magnitude of change likely to be experienced, so that the overall effect is moderate adverse and not major. That's to say, merely a noticeable deterioration, and not one which is pronounced. This assessment in particular illustrates a trait of Mr Webster to downplay impact judgments, to which Mr Pleasant, naturally enough, gives less weight to in his planning judgments. Mr Webster appears to do the same thing in his assessment of the impacts on residential receptors on Blisworth Road and Milton Road. Only the residents at Sand Landing Wharf are ascribed a significant impact. You, again, sir, will have seen all of these sectors. While views by vehicle-borne users of local roads, such as Milton Road and Wrights Lane, may not experience significant effects, we say that Mr Wadsworth's assessment that pedestrians walking local roads will appreciate a significant impact should be accepted. But again, this is probably best appreciated on site. And the same applies to those walking north on footpath RL003 through viewpoints 28 and 8. Overall, sir, we submit that there will be many significant visual and landscape impacts to weigh in the planning balance. Main issue 2, planning policy and the planning balance. And again, paragraph 26, the promised full name and post-nominals. The adopted development plan consists of the West Northamptonshire Joint Core Strategy Local Plan Part 1 2014 and the South Northants Local Plan Part 2 2020. And there's no relevant neighbourhood plan for the site. The main statement of common ground confirms which development plan policies are judged or alleged to be offended against. The Joint Core Strategy, first of all, Part I only of Policy S10, which provides that development will protect, conserve and enhance the natural and built environment and heritage assets and their settings. Policy S11, proposals should be sensitively located and designed to minimise potential adverse impacts on people, the natural environment, biodiversity, historic assets, and should mitigate pollution. In addition, the location of wind energy, we're not wind energy, so I shan't read that out. And then the local plan part 2, parts 1 and B and 1D only of policy SS2. Planning permission will be granted where the proposed development uses a design-led approach to demonstrate compatibility and integration with its surroundings and the distinctive local character of the area in terms of type, scale, massing, siting, form, design, materials and detail, and secondly, incorporates suitable landscape treatment as an integral part of the planning of the development. And part 1B only of policy EMP6, development that relates to the diversification of an existing farm
agricultural estate or other land-based rural business will be acceptable in principle, provided that the character, scale and type of proposal is compatible with its location and landscape setting. There was disagreement over the meaning of policy S11. The appellant considers policy S11 only requires the adverse impact of any proposed renewable energy development to be minimised. Council disagrees with that interpretation of policy. The requirement to minimise impacts in this context requires, we say, a consideration of whether in principle a scheme is acceptable at all and whether any scheme is too big for the location chosen. Not all sizes of scheme are going to be acceptable in all locations. But perhaps the disagreement is not as important as it might be, given that both Mr Stevens and Mr Pleasant agree that all 4 policy tests substantially require the decision taker to take into account a proposal's size and scale, location and impact, and assess compatibility with the landscape's character and local amenity. The relevance and requirements of national national planning and energy policy have not featured prominently during the inquiry. That is because they are essentially agreed. In the very recent appeal decision in Telford, Shropshire, both the Inspector and the Secretary of State made the position very clear. In that context, the agreed benefits of the proposed development are set out at paragraph 510 of the main Statement of Common Ground. The development would significantly contribute towards meeting national renewable energy targets and reducing carbon emissions. It would provide up to 49.72 megawatts of electricity, which is equivalent to approximately the annual needs of in excess of 13,000 houses, and can result in carbon saving of approximately 11,750 tonnes per year. Energy production is plainly a benefit that attracts significant weight. The development would support direct and indirect jobs during the construction phase and a smaller number of jobs when the solar farm is operational. The Council gives this benefit limited weight. Any jobs created in construction would have to be balanced by the loss of tenant farming jobs during the 40-year operational phase. In terms of biodiversity net gain, it's agreed that based on the DEFRA biodiversity metric 3.0, the development would enable a net gain of 195%, and this is a significant benefit from an ecological perspective, which goes significantly above and beyond policy and legislative requirements. Mr Stevens accepted that this should attract significant weight. Of the other benefits claimed, the Council does not accept that any further weight should be given to the investment by the applicant. That is the role of all applicants. The benefits are those realised by the investment. Any other approach would simply be double counting. And the suitability of the site chosen. Again, this is a matter that is the product of the planning balance outcome. Even though the Officer Report to Committee identified such a benefit, it was wrong to do so. The agreed matters that weigh against the development are set out at paragraph 511 of the main Statement of Common Ground. Firstly, harm to the landscape and character of the area. Plainly, given that the parties are at odds over impact, the weight is not agreed either. However, the Council submits that the appellants have seriously underestimated the scale of the change that will be brought about in the area, particularly close to the village of Gayton. So you've heard from local people how that change will affect them on a daily basis. Similarly, the appellant stresses the temporary nature of the permission, but 40 years is a generational change, perhaps even longer than that. Local people feel that they're being asked to shoulder too great a burden on behalf of the national need for clean energy. Second, there will be a loss of around 10.46 hectares of Grade 3 agricultural land. Draft National Energy Policy EN3 advises avoid where possible. This is a matter to which Mr Pleasant gives very limited weight and Mr Stevens limited weight.
16% of the appeal site is VMV. The appellant has stressed that the site would be sheep ready so that an agricultural function would remain. However, no real examples of practice elsewhere were given, and the evidence from local farmers is that stocking levels are very much reduced. It sounds to the council like a management mechanism rather than a serious agricultural enterprise. To these may be added matters on which there is disagreement as set out at para 6.1. The first is harm to the Grand Union Canal Conservation Area and Grade 2 listed bridge over the canal on Milton Road. The appellant's heritage assessment opined that the northern parcel is not considered an aspect of the setting of the conservation area that contributes to its significance. Unsurprisingly, faced with that advice, Mr. Pleasant gives the alleged harm no weight at all. The officer's report identifies some harm to the setting of the conservation area. The area appraisal and management plan recognises how important the landscape setting is to the heritage significance of the area. We submit Mr. Stevens is correct to give this heritage harm limited weight in the overall planning balance, even though it was outweighed by the public benefits of electricity generation in the NPPF para 202 balance. The council has not identified any harm to the Gayton conservation area. We also submit that the development will diminish the overall tranquility of the area, and this too is a factor on the negative side of the overall planning balance, in addition to the visual harm to amenity. While there is no highway objection from the local highway authority, the construction traffic on narrow country roads, with the potential at least for temporary conflicts and reversing up, will make the area a much less tranquil place to live in. The propellant proposes construction traffic on a Saturday. This was debated at the conditions session. In the overall planning balance, the council recognises, like the user did in the Shropshire case, that there are conflicting demands on the countryside resource, and that the demands on the countryside to help meet the needs for renewable and clean energy generation are increasing. However, sir, we submit that in this particular corner of the countryside, the demand being made by the appellant is excessive, and that the appeal should be dismissed.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Do I just need to ask about that last sentence in 37? Because we didn't really discuss.
No, we didn't.
Because there's no proposal for construction hours at the moment.
Well, yes, it was debated outside the condition session, and we agreed that it would be swept up within the details to be approved in the management plan.
Okay.
I think we did that. I did that this morning with my own friend after I typed this last night.
Understood. Understood. Thank you very much for that. Miss Hall.
Thank you. Would you also like a Word version sent to your case officer? Would that be yes?
Yeah, we're going to upload a PDF version onto the...
So it fell under the...
It's all right.
Fell under the back of the chair.
It can't be important because it hasn't worked all week.
Oh,
It's right to some good to be smashed on.
Yeah, we're going to upload a PDF version onto the website.
That's absolutely fine.
But we're going to send... I've asked for a Word version to be sent to you. And if you don't get it, then please shout.
Well, that's very helpful.
Thank you, sir. As set out in opening, the issues between the main parties to the appeal are strikingly narrow. It is agreed that the only potential reason for refusal is based on landscape and character. Within that, it's agreed there are no significant effects on any of the landscape character areas as a whole, whether at a national, region, or even at a local level. It's agreed that there are no significant effects on longer range views, and in character terms, that the site is not designated and is of medium value. It's agreed that the LVIA methodology is sound, with the only differences between landscape witnesses being matters of reasonable differences in professional judgment. Whilst the planning authority alleges some heritage harm, contrary to the appellant's case of no harm, this is said to attract only limited weight, and it's agreed to be outweighed by the public benefits. The harm relates to the Grand Union Canal Conservation Area and the Grade 2 listed turnover bridge, Bridge 47.
It's agreed there's no harm to the Gayton Conservation Area and indeed no publicly accessible views of the appeal site from the Gayton Conservation Area. The benefits of generating renewable energy are also agreed to be at least significant, and it's agreed that significant weight should attach to the ecological enhancements that will be brought about by the scheme. There are no other harms alleged by the Planning Authority. Third parties raised concerns in relation to a number of other issues, such as loss of agricultural land, highways, objections, including proximity to the school, grid connection and impacts on tourism, and these are dealt with in detail below. However, in short, so the appellant's professional evidence demonstrates an absence of effect on highways, as agreed by the Highway Authority. The HGV route doesn't pass the school. Grid connection isn't a matter for this appeal, although we do say that early connection is secured and that's relevant. There is no evidence of any effect on leisure or tourism, and the loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, around 10 hectares split across both parts of the site, has been taken into account but is afforded limited weight by the Planning Authority and very limited weight by the appellant. Turning to those issues in turn then, so landscape character first. The focus at the inquiry on the points of difference between the witnesses shouldn't obscure the extensive areas of agreement listed in the Statement of Common Ground. And in particular, it's agreed that there would be no significant adverse effects on any of the character areas as a whole, national, regional or local. Further, it's agreed there would be beneficial effects on 2 landscape receptors, canopy trees and open fields. Sorry, that shouldn't be open fields. I think that should be hedgerows.
Yes.
A lot of people have checked that and not spotted that. That should be hedgerows, so I apologise. The only points of difference in relation to negative effects on landscape receptors relate to open fields, land use, in relation to the susceptibility and therefore sensitivity of this element and the magnitude of change. In relation to susceptibility and therefore sensitivity, given an agreed medium value for the site, Mr. Webster considers the site to be of low susceptibility and on a precautionary basis of medium sensitivity, whereas Mr. Wadsworth considers that the site has a high susceptibility and a high sensitivity. However, the high rating is out of kilter with relevant guidance on this subject provided by Natural England and endorsed by the authors of Glivia, in which characteristics of this appeal site fit far more closely with characteristics associated with those types of landscapes that are said in that guidance to have a lower sensitivity to solar development, including, for example, larger fields, not being rugged, steep or natural in land cover, not being parkland. The site area includes major infrastructure such as the A43 and West Coast Main Line, roads and tracks, and it isn't remote or wild. There are no important designated views into the site and no landscape designations. Bringing all that together, we say Mr. Webster's evidence should be preferred as being based upon the most relevant guidance, and as a matter of common sense, the landscape just isn't right at the top of the list of sensitivity. In this regard, Mr. Webster and the LVIA and Mr. Askew, who reviewed the LVIA and updates on behalf of the Planning Authority, were eventually in broad agreement with Mr. Askew, finding that the site had a medium sensitivity or medium high in some places. The Southern Green Review finds that the site and immediate vicinity, quote, vary between low to medium sensitivity, depending on the presence of local negative detractors such as compounds, the railway corridor or major roads, and associated loss of tranquility. Mr. Wadsworth is therefore something of an outlier in ascribing a high sensitivity and susceptibility when all other experts have determined that the site should be better described as having something around a medium sensitivity. In relation to magnitude of change, Mr. Wadsworth's assessment that there would be a large magnitude of change at year 1 and not diminishing at all by year 15 again skews his conclusions towards the more severe end of the spectrum. At site level, he concludes a major adverse effect at year 1 and that would remain major at year 15. This fails to reflect a balanced approach. On Mr. Wadsworth's own assessment, 2 of the site landscape receptors experience a beneficial rather than negative effect. And it fails to reflect the Glivia recommended inputs into magnitude, which would include consideration of the temporary nature of the scheme and its reversibility. Mr. Wadsworth accords solar development the highest level of change and harm, but this, as Mr. Webster had explained, shows that Mr. Wadsworth hasn't applied the methodology in a way which would acknowledge that other developments, such as housing or other built form, would have an even greater impact. As such, Mr Webster's written evidence sets out Mr Wadsworth's judgments are skewed unreasonably towards the higher end and don't reflect the true impacts of this type of development, which would see panels only up to 2.67 metres, that being much lower than housing, and naturally of a much lower volumetric and spatial impact than housing, and including large areas of natural planting, including wildflowers, scrub and hedgerow, plus leaving room for an ongoing agricultural use in the form of sheep grazing. It is therefore not a site-wide complete loss of agricultural land as suggested by the Planning Authority. Turning to visual effects, and firstly the canal, Mr Wadsworth agreed in cross-examination that given the 26 miles of canal in South Northamptonshire and 6 miles in this character area, the appeal site and this location was not one of the most tranquil and remote parts of the canal, particularly given the A43 and West Coast rail line. It is agreed that there are no key views into the site, and the views do exist are filtered by an existing hedgerow. Yes, there are some gaps in that hedge, as with any hedgerow, but the site is demonstrably not contributing to any sense of openness or, quote, long-range views out across the countryside, which is a quote from the core document, in this location, which instead is achieved by looking towards the south, towards Gayton, and along the key views that are in fact identified in the Conservation Area Management Plan. Further, those gaps will be infilled as part of the landscaping plan. The panels are also set back beyond 10 to 20 metres of scrub planting and around 30 to 40 metres from the hedge in total in this location, which further contributes to reducing the views of the proposal. Whilst Mr Wadsworth criticised the heights that might be achieved by the proposed species mix on the landscape strategy plan, this is merely a strategy plan at this stage. It is not a planting plan, and a proposed condition secures final details which the Planning Authority can input into to agree an appropriate species mix and management regime. Again, Mr Wadsworth's views that the effects would not reduce over time are against the grain. Mr Webster considers that the effects would reduce from moderate at year 1 to minor at year 15 for users of the canal, whereas Mr Wadsworth sees no reduction at all, and that is, in our submission, plainly unrealistic. It is also, again, contrary to the Planning Authority's own review of the LVIA, which concluded that planting would assist to mitigate the effects as the planting matures, and I give the reference. Turning to close range viewpoints on public rights-of-way in and adjoining the site, as a matter of common sense and context, it would be striking if any major development proposal didn't cause significant effects when standing in the site or on its boundary. As Mr Wadsworth agreed, the receptor, that is the person walking the route, should be assessed and not the static photo or viewpoint. With that in mind, the time spent actually walking through the site is limited on both routes, which are parts of longer routes broadly between the canal and Rotherthorpe, or represent parts of a circular walk, or indeed a route from Gayton to Rotherthorpe. Regardless of the route, the time spent in the site itself is very limited, and in relation to both public rights-of-way, views diminish very rapidly upon leaving the site given topography, and in relation to views of the appeal site from the north, intervening woodland and vegetation means there is no lengthy experience of walking towards a solar farm. It should be noted that the appellant doesn't consider that both parcels can be seen together in views from the north on public rights-of-way LA 3 and 4. The inspector will have reached his own view on conclusion on his site visit. The third receptor then, walkers on roads. Mr Wadsworth and Mr Webster agreed that no significant effects would be experienced by passengers or drivers of vehicles. However, Mr Wadsworth contended for an effect on the users of Milton Road and Wrights Lane by walkers. Simultaneous or sequential views may be experienced when travelling on Milton Road. However, this is most unlikely to be undertaken by foot, given the lack of footway. And if it is used by walkers, their attention is likely to be focused upon the traffic and not on any scenery available over the hedges on either side of the road. Further, any view is oblique, fleeting and partial. In relation to Wrights Lane, the majority of this route doesn't afford views of the northern parcel. For a short stretch of the southern section towards Gayton, part of Field E in the northern parcel is visible as part of an oblique view to the east. As Mr Webster explained, the higher portion of this field is most visible, and the appellant has amended the scheme to pull the parcels down the hill and away from the most visible areas of that field. In this context, it's not a significant effect, and as part of the wider journey on Wrights Lane, the experts agree the view is intermittent, partial and oblique. The view also takes in the West Coast rail line and the periphery of Northampton, including the development on the M1 corridor. On SCP-14, Mr Wadsworth agreed in cross-examination that this should more properly have a medium value as a view. That has to be right, as high-value views in the agreed methodology would be of national importance. The view is of attractive countryside, yes, but is neither from within or to a designated landscape. In paragraph 1.37 of the Statement of Common Ground, the experts agreed that this right-of-way affords opportunities for longer-range, intermittent, oblique, partial views of the northern parcel of the site. Essentially, the view is very similar to that from Wrights Lane, but is even further away, and therefore the site is an even smaller component in what is a relatively busy view. At final viewpoint, SCP-28, Mr Wadsworth picked out this view from a kinetic walk which also takes in SCP-7, 8 and 29, none of which he considered to give rise to significant effects. And that says much about an approach which is focused upon the photo viewpoint rather than the walk as a whole. When looking at the walk, neither witness identifies a significant effect. Mr Webster states negligible minor and Mr Wadsworth states minor moderate. Mr Wadsworth agreed in cross-examination that the view is part of a sequence where the land rises and falls, and this was at the worst point. It should be noted that it is SCP-29 which is most akin to the important view from the Gayton Conservation Area, and not SCP-28, which is much further outside the conservation area, although both are in fact outside the conservation area. Neither witness contends there to be any significant adverse effect from SCP-29, and 28 is too far from the conservation area to be sensibly associated with it, given it is the second field away from the boundary. Turning to conclusions on landscape and visual overall, in the round, yes, there are some landscape effects from this scheme. However, they are remarkably limited given its scale. No landscape designations affect the site, and it is not a valued landscape in NPPF terms. The topography and vegetation act to largely screen the site from the most sensitive element, being the Grand Union Canal and its users. The planning authority's main concern appears to be that the hedge planting won't be effective. However, there is no evidence to support that view. Gapping up a hedgerow is commonplace, and a management plan will be in place to ensure that the planting takes, or if it doesn't, it's replaced and maintained. Otherwise, the planning authority's approach appears to have been to assume a sensitivity which in reality doesn't exist, isn't in line with relevant National England guidance and the views of other landscape experts. So I address other matters, in turn highways and HGV routing. So the Inspector and the Secretary of State will have the transport statement, supplementary note provided by motion, together with a swept path analysis for the sharp bend in Gayton. Further, the Planning Authority raises no issues in relation to highways, and the Highway Authority doesn't object to the imposition of conditions, subject to the imposition of conditions securing a construction management plan. That condition is proposed and is agreed. It will include securing a route for HGVs and appropriate hours of working during the construction phase, amongst other things. So together, all of those documents demonstrate an absence of any significant or severe effect on the highway as a result of traffic generated either during construction or operation, that the construction phase is 36 weeks, it will generate 8 construction vehicles a day, and spread over the day and time to arrive separately through the management plan, this is very far from a severe impact. An absence of any harm caused by HGV routing, the route avoids sensitive areas, doesn't pass schools, doesn't require HGVs to cross a weight-restricted bridge, and is wholly adequate for the 8 movements a day. An HGV is well capable of making the tightest turn on the route at the bends in Gayton, as demonstrated by the swept path, and that works in both directions. If the Secretary of State considers it necessary to impose a condition requiring a survey of the condition of the road, and that the appellant be asked to put the highway back into that condition following the construction phase, the appellant is content to agree to that. And so one has been drafted and proffered. Turning to BMV and agricultural land, 10.46 hectares of the site is grade 3A, best and most versatile agricultural land. However, the site does not in fact function as BMV, as the mapping shows that the parcels of 3A are within the broader 3B site and are not capable of being farmed in any different way to the remainder of the site, i.e. as 3B non-BMV land. They are not usable or meaningful in extent. The threshold for consulting Natural England as a potential significant loss of BMV land is 20 hectares, and this proposal results in a loss of just over half of that. The loss therefore cannot be described as significant in planning terms, and rightly, the planning authority didn't pursue this as a reason for refusal. Indeed, the debate between Mr Stevens and Mr Pleasant was between whether very limited or limited weight should be attached. Insofar as this point relates to a wider argument in relation to agricultural land loss, there's no policy support for that, and in any event there remains the potential for agricultural use, if not arable use. The NPPF specifically refers to the economic benefits of best and most versatile agricultural land, rather than agricultural land per se. Further, as agreed by Mr Stevens, it is common sense, and acknowledged within draft EN3, that solar farms of this scale are likely to need to be built on agricultural land. The aim is just to avoid BMV and designations. And in this context, the less than significant loss of BMV at 10 hectares rightly is only afforded at negative weight right at the bottom of the spectrum. Insofar as it relates to an objection from the tenant farmer about loss of business, planning so is about land use in the public interest rather than private business interests. While there is no doubt a wider economic benefit associated with agricultural land and BMV in particular, as referred to the NPPF at paragraph 174B. Decommissioning. Third parties raised issues relating to decommissioning. However, the planning authority and the appellant have drafted an appropriate condition to require a decommissioning strategy within an appropriate time frame, and there's no reason to suspect that the appellant won't abide by that condition, requiring the site to be dismantled at that point. Turning to noise and tranquility. The appellant has undertaken a thorough noise assessment, which assessed noise-sensitive receptors, including residential canal boats and dwellings, and concluded that internal noise criteria would be met for sensitive receptors. And the BWB rebuttal note confirms that noise levels would also be met for garden areas. Finally, the appellant has submitted a tranquility assessment to consider receptors on public rights of way, including through the site and on the Grand Union Canal towpath. Again, the conclusion is that noise generation would be below background levels, as the area is demonstrably not tranquil, given the presence of the West Coast Main Line, the other side of the canal, and the A43. No other technical noise evidence has been presented to the inquiry, and the planning authority's only comment by Mr Stevens in cross-examination was that he wasn't convinced that BWB had assessed receptors at the western end of the northern parcel. However, as explained by Mr Pleasant, this is not correct. The plan of survey locations within the assessment shows a number in and around the western end of the site, including on the public right-of-way and on the towpath. Accordingly, there has been no evidence to undermine BWB's assessment, and there are no material negative noise effects associated with the appeal scheme, merely assumptions which aren't supported by evidence. There is therefore no proper basis either for the imposition of a condition requiring yet further noise surveys or a finding of any harm in this regard. Particularly, there's no basis for assuming conflict with paragraph 100 of the NPPF, which should be seen instead as referring to public rights of way as a physical, usable resource, rather than a policy which takes in amenity concerns. That is more accurately paragraph 174E and a reference to noise pollution. And that needs to be seen in the context of Mr Stevens' agreement that the LPA didn't take any issue with the part of the policy S11 which refers to minimising pollution. Turning to grid connection and cabling, the appellant has a grid offer which permits connection to the grid from late 2024. As suggested by third parties, many projects are currently facing lengthy delays to obtain a grid connection offer and are provided offers within 10 years' time. And it's hoped that by the time it's hoped the grid will be strengthened and able to take the additional generating capacity. However, as stated by Mr Pleasant, this is a notable benefit of this scheme, that it can provide renewable energy in the immediate future rather than providing a benefit much further down the line. Rather than being a negative, this is a significant positive, and sites which benefit from early grid connections should be rightly prioritised in order to make the best use of the grid capacity that exists at present. Cabling between the sites isn't part of this application, nor is connection from the site parcels to the grid. The latter will be undertaken by the DNO under permitted development rights. If any further application is required for cabling infrastructure in the future, the appropriate consenting regime will determine it. Heritage. The council asserts that there is a low level of less than substantial harm to the Grand Union Canal and to the Grade 2 listed turnover bridge, which it collectively afforded limited weight. The careful note from Mr Morley appended to Mr Pleasant's evidence explains that there are areas of the setting which do positively contribute to the significance of the canal as a heritage asset, see para 419, but that cannot be applied to the appeal site. No identified important views within the management plan include views of the appeal site. To the contrary, the existing hedgerow between the northern parcel and the towpath is an important hedgerow and will be maintained and enhanced as part of the proposals. And I give the reference to Mr Morley's note wherein he explains that the site is an incidental aspect of the setting and a barely perceptible aspect of it. In his view, the northern parcel doesn't contribute anything to the significance of the canal conservation area, and therefore any harm to the site is not to be equated to harm to the significance of the canal as a heritage asset. The Grand Union Canal Management Plan does make reference to the importance of landscape to the setting of the canal, that's true. But it is not equally true for all parts of the setting, for the full 26-mile stretch of the canal through the area. That is why the management plan has identified what is truly important to the significance of the canal, and it doesn't include the appeal site or views towards it. Further, the general amenity provided by the landscape surrounding the canal shouldn't be conflated with heritage significance. The two are separate, and in terms of visual receptors experiencing any harm to amenity, this falls to the landscape evidence to assess. So I probably should have included a paragraph, and I'll just insert a coda at sort of 38A, that everything said above could apply equally to the bridge as it does to the canal. Turning to planning policy, the planning witnesses agreed that the main policy against which the proposals should be assessed is S11. The other parts of policies referred to in the reason for refusal are all references to protecting the landscape character of the area and add quite little to the policy test in S11. S11 needs to be read in the context of the plan as a whole, and specifically its own supporting text. That text refers back to Objective 1 of the Joint Core Strategy, which is, quote, to minimise demand for resources and mitigate and adapt to climate change by, including other things, encouraging renewable energy production in appropriate locations. S11, therefore, needs to be read as a policy which seeks to implement the objective of seeking to encourage renewable energy schemes. It is also the tool by which the plan determines whether a location is appropriate. In doing so, two tests are agreed to arise. One, that the proposal be sensitively located, and two, that it be designed to minimise harm to a range of factors. The only ones of which are said to be in play relate to landscape, visual receptors and heritage in the limited sense covered above, albeit that Mr Stevens' evidence doesn't actually assert that heritage should be a reason why S11 shouldn't be found to be breached. The other factors in S11 are either not in play, i.e. pollution, or there is an agreed benefit, biodiversity. These should be taken into account on a balanced approach to that policy. In relation to whether the proposals are sensitively located, Mr Stevens relies upon 1, landscape evidence, 2, the Grand Union Canal and listed bridge as heritage assets, and 3, the Grand Union Canal as a green infrastructure corridor, for his argument that the site isn't sensitively located because it is instead a sensitive location. The first landscape is agreed to be bound up with the landscape evidence considered above. The heritage argument doesn't greatly assist the planning authority, as even on its case, the harm attracts limited weight. And on Mr Morley's professional evidence, notably the only heritage expert to provide evidence to the inquiry, the harm is instead nil. In relation to the green infrastructure corridors and NE3, first, the planning authority doesn't allege any conflict with NE3. Nor could it sensibly do so. Green infrastructure policies seek to protect green infrastructure as a resource or as an asset. It is not a landscape designation, and there's no setting associated with it. The site is not within a green infrastructure corridor, and whilst it adjoins the Grand Union Canal corridor, the landscape proposals are to add additional planting, and therefore green infrastructure in this location and thereby expand the corridor and increase the value of the green infrastructure as an asset. There is no direct or indirect harm to the green infrastructure. The planning authority's argument boils down to the northern part of the site sharing a boundary with the canal. However, as above, the area hosts 26 miles of canal, and it cannot be that development is banned on both sides for the whole stretch. Instead, the sensitive parts of the canal need to be identified and avoided, and the Peel site is not in that category. Further, it is right that the appellant has taken steps to sensitively locate the development within the site itself by amending the scheme to pull panels away from the highest part of Field E, by including planting along the canal corridor, large areas of scrub in this location to provide setback. These points also go towards satisfying the second part of S11 in relation to minimising effects. Steps have been taken to minimise potential effects, and as agreed by Mr Stevens, the policy can't be read as requiring effects to be eliminated. Draft EN3 is agreed to be relevant and includes a recognition that solar projects are likely to cause significant impacts and are largely in rural areas, but are nevertheless a key part of government policy to address climate change, energy security and achieve net zero. In fact, the proposals are to increase solar energy production 5-fold. The parties agree that at least significant weight should attach to the benefits of renewable energy generation in light of the national policy context. The parties are also in agreement that the proposals represent an opportunity to secure meaningful net gain in the order of 195% on site, a benefit which should also be afforded significant weight. The proposal will also generate economic benefits in terms of effects arising from the construction and decommissioning phases, and smaller economic effects generated during the lifetime of the project and associated with monitoring and maintenance of the panels, landscaping and the output of the scheme. Mr Pleasant also rightly notes the long-term landscape benefits arising out of the landscaping scheme, which will endure beyond the lifetime of the project. Mr Wadsworth's concern that the trees might also come down in 40 years with the panels is fanciful. So, in conclusion, overall, S11 is reflective of government policy in terms of being permissive of renewable energy projects, but encouraging them to be on less sensitive sites by avoiding designations and avoiding higher quality agricultural land. This site fits that brief. It is therefore in compliance with the plan and government policy, and we say should be granted without delay and in line with paragraph 11C of the NPPF. So, unless I can assist you with any queries, those are my closing submissions. Thank you very much.
Miss Hall, thank you very much indeed. Formality requires that I ask whether there are any other matters to be raised in terms of any other applications. Thank you very much indeed. Gosh, that would have been a shock if it hadn't happened at that point. As I say, formality dictates. Ladies and gents, thank you all very much for your time. We have heard the comprehensive expert evidence from the councils and from the appellants, and I hope, Councillor Cooper, and thank you very much for your time for attending on each day. I hope you feel that I've given the opportunities that I can to local residents to pass on their concerns and their views, and thank you for also continuing that yourself. The process looking forward is that the civil service industrial action, a part of which has been referred to in relation to this case, but actually has its implications for the upcoming case, has had an effect in terms of delivery timescales. People increasingly see that from PINs. Equally, some parties will know that I'm involved in another solar farm case, perhaps in a couple of weeks' time. So there's a number of conflicting demands on my time, but don't forget my time is only to produce the report. The report then goes to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State takes a period to reach his decision. So I can't give you any concrete answers if the question was, when are we going to hear? I guess I should hope that despite our microphone moments, that the streaming has also provided an opportunity for others who couldn't be here to engage in the inquiry. And other than the microphones, it's felt fairly seamless, although I haven't been able to see myself in the position that I've sat. I think there's no other matters that I can seek to get clarity on at this point. I have all of the comments from parties and all of the comments via the closing submissions from the appellants. I think all that remains is me to say thank you very much. Thank you for finishing at a very reasonable time on the Friday too. Thank you to the appellants for their, to the advocates for their very positive engagement in the inquiry. It's been helpful throughout. And thank you to all those who've attended. I think I must just now formally close the inquiry and wish you a good journey home. And we're going to yet another bank holiday weekend, so yet another bank holiday weekend. So I do hope that it's a good and positive one for all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I can't put an email out through the post office, so I'm hoping that's out with you.
Okay, well, I've asked the team to check.
In simple terms, I'm suggesting a